Well, hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and episode 2 of Misidentified. This is my series where I present my views on phenomena that haven't been identified correctly. Maybe there have been misperceptions or lack of data or something, so that we're not thinking about it as clearly as we could. In the previous episode, episode 1, if you haven't seen it yet, we covered the so-called drones in eastern Colorado that showed up again a few years ago. And if you'll remember, there was big investigations of what these fleets of drones could be. Drones that could go upwards of 100 miles an hour, did not make any sounds, and could stay aloft for hours and hours as people saw them. Doesn't sound like your typical drones to me. Maybe what we're calling drones are actually some other form of UFO, UAP, something like that. Another factor to consider was that these showed up with the same lighting pattern, red, green, white. In the 1960s, decades ago, same thing showed up. So what are we actually dealing with there? That was episode 1. Now, in episode 2, I'd like to cover some aspects of the crop circle phenomena, because this is something I've been involved with since 1997, as you know. And my feeling about the crop circles overall is that people haven't really gotten the main message of the crop circles, and that's why I'm making this video today. Mostly what people think of as crop circles, they're either going to argue that they're all created by paranormal phenomena or meteorological phenomena, or on the other side that the whole thing's it's a hoax, it's man-made. And in my view, it's actually considerably more complex than this, as my research partner Ron Russell, who took me on my first crop circle tour back in 1997. I got interested in this from remote viewing, as you know from my other videos. Remote viewing crop circles. I didn't know much about this in 1996 when I first did my first RV session on a crop circle. So I felt like I had to go over to the UK to see these things for myself. So Ron has always pointed out it's quite it's a considerably more complex situation. And that's because you have a whole variety of crop circles. They don't just come from one source, and there's a type of simplistic thinking in our minds that we want it to be just one thing. Again, going back to episode 1, we want things that look like drones to be drones, even if they don't fit the characteristics of the drones that we know about, and everyone who should know something about it in the government says we have no idea what this is. We swear we don't know what these are. There's a tendency for our minds to want to follow simple narratives. And I think if we're going to make any progress scientifically in studying these different phenomena, we have to consider alternatives. Now, going back to crop circles, this is a great book that I recommend you take a look at. Terry Wilson, The Secret History of Crop Circles. And the reason I like this book, I came across this at a crop circle conference somewhere back in the UK in the late 90s. It goes through all of the original crop circles over the years throughout the world. They've been happening for a long, long time. They're not just a modern phenomena. It didn't just start with Doug and Dave in the UK in the 80s. It goes back 100 years, and there are even cases, the mowing devil, for example, where it goes back hundreds of years. If those descriptions were crop circles, we can't be sure because we don't have the exact, really drawings or photographs of what they look like. It could go back farther than that. But the interesting thing about these circles in the past is they were simple circles. I mean, nothing wrong with that. That's what crop circles have looked like traditionally until the 80s in the UK. They were simple circles, and they often appear around UFO sightings. No joke. The Tully saucer nest in the 60s in Australia is one example where people saw these flying discs over marshy areas, there was the smell of sulfur, hint, hint, and these patterns would appear there, swirled patterns in the reeds. Even one of the people that admitted to making some of them, I believe it was Doug Bauer of the Doug and Dave team, had been in Australia at the time when the Tully saucer nests happened, according to my understanding. And as an artist, he wanted to replicate them back in the UK because they had a UFO type feeling. So the UFOs really do have something to do with crop circles. There's no doubt about it. Look at this one. This is from Chapeau, Quebec, Canada, 1969. Sort of reminds you of the various types of patterns in the ground that have been seen around UFOs. Makes you think of the Delphos, Kansas case that Ted Phillips studied. I believe that was 72, where, a farm kid saw a hovering UFO, and then there was this glowing ringed area below it that stayed glowing for quite a while, and all the farm animals avoided. And there are other cases of this. Let's take a look here. I'm just briefly going over this great book, Blind Tarn Moss, Cumbria, England, 1968, where there were flying saucers seen, and where they had been in the center of a very large rush bed that had been the tarn was a quite distinct, completely circular pattern of flattened rush reeds, and 650 feet across. And so these have been seen around flying saucers for a long time, again, associated with these ozone type smells, sulfur smells, which tells us that we're getting some sort of chemical and physical reaction going on. It's like physical evidence that there's a real reaction going on to these saucers. Even in the early 70s, look at the patterns. They're very simple circles. I've seen these myself in the UK. I believe it was by the Westbury Whitehorse, where we were there in 2010 with our crop circle tour group. And there below the Westbury Horse was this sort of swirled area. It really didn't look like anyone had anything to do with it. Just the swirl of it was very gentle. It looked like it had been made by maybe a whirlwind or a plasma vortices, the Terence Meaden idea. People have proposed that there could be some sort of natural explanation for these, in addition to the UFO aspect. But my own witnesses in Black Swan Ghost, this is the newly revised edition, just looking here, Louise Voves, who I described in Chapter 8, she described, as you probably heard me talk about before, but I actually talked with her, and the interview is on the blackswanghost.com website, my website for the book, in the witness video section. You can watch the interview with her for free. She said that she was picking huckleberries with her brother in Usk, Washington, northeastern Washington state. And there was a mother and son out there. Her brother made huckleberry products for a living. There's a certain season. I've been out with people picking huckleberries, a certain season when they're the ripest, they're the best. And they go up there, and they're no sooner are they picked their huckleberry picking spot where they see the classic flying disc, falling leaf pattern, kind of moving back and forth. You kind of, like she said, like two tortoise shells put together, flying disc, lights around the edges. The thing is spinning. The mother and son panic, go down to the town of Usk, go find a phone, payphone. It's a very small town even today. Call the sheriff. And soon come the military from Spokane Air Base in a big convoy, according to Louise. And they have a lot of questions. They want to know, did you see anyone? Were you drinking anything? Tell us everything about it. Now, this is what Louise said that's interesting that connects it to crop circles. She said that as this disc left, it was just her and her brother at this point, the thing went right down over the meadow, made a whistling sound went right over the meadow at a high speed and flattened all the plants. Not the typical round crop circle, nothing like that. It was a line, like a 50-foot, length line going through the field in width, 50-foot width line going down the field in a straight line. She said, I asked her how flat. She said flat as a pancake. So that makes you start thinking of crop circles, doesn't it? And there we have a witness who saw a UFO flatten crops. So there's no doubt in my mind that there is a UFO connection to some of the crop circles or flattened grain crops and so forth. It's just based on the witness testimony. We also had Paul and Sonia, who you can see my interview with them too on the BlackSwanGhost.com channel. They encountered these glowing humanoids over Silbury Hill. Now, if you know anything about Wiltshire crop circles, Silbury Hill is like sort of the center of crop circle activity in maybe the UK, at least in Wiltshire itself. And they had a very strange encounter, including missing time, a really dark blackness that enveloped Silbury Hill. This was a time when you could still go up there and camp overnight, which British Heritage doesn't let you do anymore. They want to preserve it. Silbury Hill being the largest and oldest earth mound in Europe. And Paul and Sonia described lights coming down over the field on the other side of the A4, and then they looked and it seemed like there were these little beings floating in these small pyramid-shaped orbs. Well, the thing is, there were other witnesses to this in the parking lot, and then we had Paul Weige, the crop circle researcher, who unfortunately is no longer with us, who talked about this at conferences, seen a wall of fog, which Paul and Sonia saw, and then a light come out from behind a bush and follow his car, which Paul and Sonia saw from up on top of Silbury Hill. So we had sort of multiple witnesses to Paul and Sonia's experience, which left them feeling like changed people, they told me. And you can watch the interview for yourself. You'll see what they said. But again, this is something that happened right next to an area where tons of crop circles have showed up over the years. In fact, the first one I ever saw was in Mill Hill, the Mill Hill formation of 1997, a huge Coke snowflaked fractal shaped crop circle, which, something I even studied in graduate school when I was looking at fractals for my dissertation. So this is sort of, again, another connection between crop circles and UFO activity, orbs, ball lightning, paranormal phenomena, and so forth. We have to be honest here. As the 80s went on, more and more people got involved in making these. Now, this is not something I originally believed. If you saw any of my interviews before around 2000, I actually was one of the people that believed humans couldn't do this because, the night time's very short in the UK, 4 or 5 hours, and there was a sort of a real precision to these circles, and a lot of professional designers like architects would say at crop circle conferences that there's no bleeping way, humans could ever do this. It would take us 5 days in the daytime. But that really was disproved to me when we got to see a man-made formation being made for an ad. This was Matt Williams, who with his team was, paid to make an R formation at Pattern in 2000. And again, this was a small one, but it did show us that people could do something that looked reasonably good. And then, as I wrote about in Opening Minds, my book about my experience, with remote viewing and crop circles, I got invited to see one made at night. I was told it wouldn't be a legal formation, and I wasn't asked to participate in making it. I was asked just to stand there in a tram line, and they wanted to prove to me, another group wanted to prove to me they could do this. And at this point, I was really curious. Could they really do it? Well, they did. They were able to make a good pattern, and we were using a static meter at the time, and it affected our static meters So this is sort of what began to change my mind, is that there were formations that, humans could do. Here's another Matt Williams formation, which, he actually got arrested for this because he sent the diagram out before the formation was really there. And it was sort of proof that, he had made that when people had said, you can't make a seven-sided one. Anyway, I became convinced people could do more complex patterns. And that I had been wrong. I mean, it just shows you need to be flexible with your own ideas about reality. You could be wrong too. It just happens in science. Is you have one idea and then the data disprove that. And for me, the data disproved that humans could not make good circles. I found that if they had enough people out there in the fields with, laser pointers and communication devices, they could communicate and work quite efficiently in 4 hours or so to make a very good looking circle. You don't have to believe me on this if you really don't think it's possible. I mean, you make your own mind up, but that was my conclusion, is that they could do this. But here's the really interesting thing about it. The circle makers described their own experiences with seeing strange effects out there at night while they were making their circles. Tosmead Copse being one example of this is an area near Alton Barnes. It's a very old forested area. There's some fields right there. We were always sort of mystified by the Tosmead Copse, the copse being sort of a forest. And I was told there were a group of circle makers that went out there intending to make a circle, but they never did. They saw these lights start to come over the wheat from different directions. They thought, what are these cars driving into the field? They weren't. They were orbs coming over the top of the wheat. So a couple days later, a brother and sister were out around that area, and another group came out to make this particular circle in the Tosmead Copse. And this brother and sister again saw orbs come down over the area and split into multiple orbs at the same night this was being made. And then other people on Knapp Hill saw these orbs too. So even the man-made formations are associated with these sort of unexplainable orbs, ball lightning, whatever they may be. That's sort of anomalous light phenomena. Another example, the Koch and Kaiborg formation of 1999. These were two German researchers that liked to, with farmers' permission, make circles just to see if they could communicate with the circle-making intelligence, whatever that may be. And they, when we were at that Woodborough Hill nearby this formation, someone was coming to visit us, a German tourist, and this tourist saw an orb floating over this formation. Right there. This is in the East Field, and this is right over the East Field. So it's an example how human-made formations are also associated with orbs and balls of light and so forth. And then, obviously, on the more ordinary science level, we had a lot of interesting static effects around formations that we would test. We would find our static meter would move a lot in some of these formations. We originally thought we had some sort of litmus test between the real ones and the man-made ones, but later we found out that even the ones we made with farmers' permission affected our static meters. And so it was no longer a litmus test. Even these formations would knock out our cameras and batteries, even ones that I believe were man-made, where I believe I was able to identify the people that were involved in making them, having talked to them and asking them about their experiences when they were out there and so forth. And they even told me, these circle makers, that when they would be out there, just like the stories I'm telling you, they would see flying triangles, small ones come over the field, orbs, have missing time. It suggests to me that there is something about a vortex type pattern which creates non-ordinary electromagnetic effects, which I've talked about in other videos. I just think it's an important effect. We've seen it time and time again. Now, Some formations we've been involved with over the years. The first was Hill Martin, near sort of between Avebury, Swindon area. And we had found a farmer who was curious himself, and we paid him, I believe it was about 500 pound or so, something like this. Not a small amount of money to use his field for 3 days. And we made a couple days. We made 3 formations. And the biggest formation, we took a very well-known female crop circle researcher into this formation, asked her, what do you think? And she said, it looks really good. I'm really surprised. It doesn't look like it was man-made. There's still a sheen on the wheat. It doesn't look like boards. And we used ropes and boards like a mechanical method. So even the ones we made would sort of have interesting effects. We later went on to make one at Woodborough Hill, the so-called math matrix, the magical math matrix. And we had a very skilled circle maker working with us on that formation. This was for Scott Flansburgh to do a kind of a number 9 based crop circle shape. And we had some camera failure and battery failure while photographing that formation overhead in a microlight. Ron said that when he took my Olympus electronic camera, when we used, those, not the micro SD cards, but the larger SD cards as we were using back in the 90s, that the whole camera just froze up. And there were nonsensical numbers in the viewfinder that didn't indicate any error message or anything. It was just malfunction. He had to take the batteries out in the microlight, put them back in. It's not like this happens with every circle. I've seen my share of this battery and camera failure. I'm not saying it's limited to man-made formations. I'm just saying it's a function of the shape. And that's what this episode, why this is in the Misidentified series right here. It isn't the fact that it's made by a UFO, something anomalous like a plasma vortex or even a whirlwind. I've seen these whirlwinds in the UK, by the way. They can come right around you in the fields and really whip around. I imagine they could flatten some grain crops. But the point is, even if you and I go out and make them, once in a while we will experience this same anomalous camera and battery effect in our own formations. And the best example I've seen in the formations that we've made was when we were coming back from the remote viewing conference in Austin, Texas in 2002. That's 22 years ago is the time of making this video. We got permission to make a small one near Hays, Kansas. In fact, I made a little short video about it when I went through Hays recently. And every single photograph of that very small circle, as you can see from these pictures, it was just, they were all off. There were glowing, like light shapes in the photos. And this was a professional Nikon, I believe it was an FE camera. And I was told by Ron it never had made any mistakes before and never made them again, just in that circle. You can decide, is this the fluke of the camera, or is this just continuing some of the strange battery and camera failure effect that we've seen in and around crop circles, and of course happens around UFO sightings, happens around cryptids, Bigfoot, even cold fusion Lena reactions. People report strange magnetic and electronic effects. So that formation in Hays really showed me that there is something even in it's not the size of the circle that matters. It could be something about the precision of the helical pattern, the chirality of it, as we would say, of all the stalks of wheat kind of going around in a very coherent pattern, a vortex-like shape, either affecting some energy that's around it, something maybe like these relic neutrinos that Alexander Parkhomov described in Space Earth Human, coming from cosmic background radiation, which he showed had quite a sizable density around Earth. It could be affecting the flow of those neutrinos, having some other knock-on effects, and it could be non-ordinary EM fields from a sort of liquid crystal-like shape from the wheat having been, turned into a very flowing, horizontal position from vertically standing stalks. So there is some effect on the EM field, maybe even on space time itself, because we have these stories, again, going back to Ron's story that he told me that I mentioned in Black Swan Ghosts in the Paul and Sonia chapter, where he was in a formation in Avebury in 1995, I believe it was, the Scorpion Formation, if I'm not mistaken, 94, 95, and he goes out to get more film. He encounters people speaking a very old guttural Celtic language. They're shorter than average people. They're dressed in kind of a Celtic garb. He thinks, well, this is weird. They just seem like out of time. Then he feels like he's only been gone he feels like he's been gone for a while, but when he gets back, he feels like it's 45 minutes to an hour. When he gets back, he's told he's only been gone for 5 or 10 minutes. So it's like a space-time slip, which, happens around certain places. And if you look into the literature about space-time slips, this is something that people really experience. I've talked about it before. I know people who've had it happen to them, people crossing a street in town, and all of a sudden it looks like 100, 200 years ago, or, drawn carriages, barns. It just doesn't look like the place they knew, and then it snaps back to the reality we're used to. So maybe they're even through this sort of spiral vortex shape. Bob Greenyer from the Martin Fleisch Memorial Project in a video recently suggested it could be the Grebennikov effect. Grebennikov being a Russian researcher who described this cavernous structure effect, like the wheat being hollow, and it's sort of affecting the frequencies of water because the stalks are all at the same sort of diameter, and it kind of creates its own resonance. It's some sort of resonant effect that has impacts on the EM field and has caused massive amounts of camera and battery failure. I even saw this in 97 when we were out in the field. The Daneberry Triad, and Ron put his camera down. It was on, but not taking video. A Sony camcorder, which used tape at those times, digital tape. I think it probably was high 8 at the time. And it melted the solder joints on the inside. How often does that happen to your camera? But this is the type of thing that people report. If you do some research, you'll find this is true. And I've been talking about it ever since I've been going over there. So, in any case, to conclude, and thanks for listening, it seems to me that there are much more complex effects going on in crop circles, regardless of how they're made, that certain circles which have a type of resonant precision to them, a type of fractal organization of circles within circles, those are the types of patterns that seem to me have affected the cameras and batteries the most, that there's some sort of real electromagnetic effect that you find around other phenomena like this, other anomalous phenomena, which leads me to think that crop circles are, again, one aspect of a larger phenomena of energy and changes to the structure of space-time, which, again, we find around UFOs, people feeling that sort of missing time effect, a battery, camera failure, car stalling, even happening around haunted ghost sites, variety of cryptids and Bigfoot sightings, according to my own research and something that I've written about in Dark Matter Monsters. I see these as all being the same sort of effect, not to mention the blurriness that you have when people take photographs of these phenomena, that there is some alteration in maybe the permittivity or permeability of that particular space due to the shapes of the circle itself. And that's why I think crop circles have been misidentified. I think people are focused only on what could have created them and not on the end result that we've seen the human circle makers have told us about. And many, many people who have gone into these circles have seen these same sort of phenomena. So that's my view on crop circles, is that there's just a third level effect that we really haven't focused on. And that's why I say in one of my postcards for Opening Minds, real or man-made, it's the wrong question. And this is why I say it in my postcard for Opening Minds, real, man-made or real, it's the wrong question. Because it seems to me many types of crop circles can be real, even the man-made type. After all, anything that affects my cameras and batteries that way and just causes them to fail. The case that was really the strongest for me was the Devil's Den formation, where I saw 3 devices: a Sony camcorder, my static meter, and 2 guys that came in with a GPS. Their batteries completely drained from being fully charged to nothing in seconds. The static meter, the battery on that, the 9-volt drained, and the camcorder got a dirty heads indicator, and it's a brand new camera. That usually happens after years of using it. So that's just one example of a circle where multiple devices failed at the same time. So in any case, thanks for listening. Always curious about your points of view on this. Feel free to put your comments in the box below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next episode. Take care for now, and bye.